Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co., and today I'm reviewing Ice 2nd Edition and expansions. This is a game that I've covered before. I've played the original game, I've given my thoughts, my opinions. I'll kind of dive into that briefly and telling you how my original thoughts and opinions, and then I'll also, more importantly, be telling you my thoughts and opinions based on the changes from 1st to 2nd Edition, as well as the expansion and the way they've done that, which there's a whole bunch of things to get into. We'll explain all of it. Before we do though, disclaimer that please take into account that while this review itself is not sponsored, we did just do a sponsored playthrough on the game, so there is that muddied waters, and take that into account, of course. That said, let's go ahead and dive into what Ice is, how the game plays, my original thoughts on it, and then how things changed with the new content. The general idea of Ice is a tile laying game, sort of. It's not your typical tile laying game where you're placing down tiles and building out and expanding the world. Rather, you start off with this little layer here. Well, not the way it is now. This is already an end game state. But you start off with a bunch of layers of snow, and you're slowly digging down into the ice. You have the opportunity to slowly excavate tiles, going deeper and deeper into the surface of the board, gathering more and more valuable tiles as you go. This is a tile not laying, but a tile excavating game. So a whole different genre in its own right, and a very interesting one in just watching the board develop. The general idea is you have your own architects or your own expedition leader. You can have a whole bunch of architects that are a shared kind of resource that will go around the board. They'll help all the players dig down into the ice, but it does require control of those architects and moving around. You can be working with an action economy across some rounds of play. Well, 4 rounds of play, but the original game was different. But you're going to be acting across a variety of rounds of play, utilizing your actions every single round to slowly dig deeper into the ice. The various snow tiles you gather are going to help you, giving you powers and abilities you can trade in, so you can go ahead and have a hand of snow tiles and use those when it's helpful or when they're going to be beneficial for your actions. And then you're going to go ahead and try to ultimately be getting your hands on artifacts to be able to fill various requests. There's going to be a bunch of requests in the game. These requests require certain combinations of artifacts, which is the main reason you're trying to gather these artifacts. So the entire thing ultimately comes down to trying to go down deep into the board, gather the better artifact tiles, and cash those in for these various requests, as well as the public goals that will be in play. There's going to be a selection of different public goals in play. Every round you have 3 of those public goals shuffled up and put in play to be able to give you something else to drive for, certain types of artifacts you want to go for, things like that. And so ultimately, gather artifacts for both public and private goals while trying to be mindful of your action economy in this game and the best way to drive forward relative to the other players. That's the core idea of what Ice is. Again, you start the board, you start excavating, gather what you need, and do so more efficiently than other players. Now, there are a bunch of things different from the 2nd edition, which is where we're going to cover as much detail as possible. I'm going to cover the changes from 1st to 2nd edition, as well as the expansion, which is a little complicated because an element from the 1st edition of the game is now an expansion element instead. If you back the original game, there was an element that was present that's now part of the expansion. So a few things to cover there, but let's talk about some of the differences. And some of them are quality of life differences, or at least in my opinion they are. Others are changes that don't necessarily affect me, but let's go into the changes as much as possible, and I'll try to pin any comments as far as any details I miss. I say that because some of these changes have been in flux even as I cover this, because I should have said this earlier, but the 2nd edition is a prototype. So while this is a new version of an original game, this new version is a prototype, rules, components, all that stuff still in flux. But with that said, the changes you can expect to see, or some of the main changes you can expect to see, is first of all, the game only lasts 4 days. The game is shortened to 4 days, which might sound like a bad thing, but we'll talk my opinion soon. So let's go ahead and cover the changes first, then talk about the opinion. But the game is going to be 4 days instead, so it's reduced to a 4-day game, which means 4 rounds of play. In each round of play, you have 5 action points. There are ways to earn more action points, or technically they're exploration points, they're EPs, exploration points, but you can earn more exploration points, but you have 4 rounds of play with those 5 EP every single turn. The game board itself is reduced. It previously used to be 5 layers of tiles, which had 2 elements of the game. The first is that combined with the longer game, it also took longer to get through things. It meant the game experience was longer. But then over here in this game, we have 3 layers of tiles, plus the bottom layer is kind of built in. So technically it goes from 5 layers to 3 layers, but practically speaking, as far as the thematic change or the practical change, it's really only being reduced by 1 layer of tiles. But that makes setup a lot faster and gives you a shorter experience combined with the 4 rounds of play. There's a bunch of other small things being there. Again, before we get to the expansion stuff, there's a bunch of other small things that you're going to have. The exploration points to excavate a snow tile is going to be 2 EP instead of 3 EP. When you play the game, it costs 3 EP to excavate a standard artifact tile on the board, but it costs 2 EP to excavate a snow tile. They're less valuable. Even though they give you an ability, they're not the main thing you're trying to get. So they changed the economy on that, although in the game, we haven't talked about it, but a big part of the game is that trying to manipulate the various architects in the game, because having architects and explorers on tiles reduces that EP cost. It reduces the cost to excavate a tile, making it cheaper. So it's all about the balance of trying to use your actions to set the board up correctly so you can properly excavate things as much as possible. There's a new study tile concept in play. These study tiles, your explorer can go ahead and spend an EP to be able to, while on a certain artifact, take a matching study tile of that choice. That's going to help you both for fulfilling requests, as well as for activating abilities on your player board. You can have your own little player board over here that you're trying to utilize those artifacts. You are trying to cash them in for points, but while you have them, they're also going to be useful for activating abilities in the game. That's going to be a big part of it. And so by having those study tiles in the game early, you have a more opportunity to start activating some of those abilities earlier in the game as you go through it. A big change is going to be that these snow tiles, previously in the original game, these snow tiles were completely random, what abilities you could expect to see on the back of each tile, versus now there's more of a set understanding of what you can get. So if you're looking at this tile over here, you know it's one of 3 abilities instead of any of the abilities. What they've done is they've taken each of the snow tile types, and there's 4 different types over here, and each type, well, plus the base camp, but there's 4 different types over there, and each type has its own variety of abilities you can have, but that means if you know you really want a certain ability, if you know you want that extra EP, if you know you want an explorer on a tile, if you know whatever it is you need, you have a better chance of trying to choose a certain type of snow tile. It gives you more of a reason to care about the dynamic of the upper landscape outside of these tiles, which actually have a movement restriction on them. So that's going to be a big change over there. There's also some small changes around how the request cards work every round. You're going to start with a hand of cards that are going to give you different things you're trying to go for in the game. You can select those hand of cards. You can either do it completely randomly, you can pick 3 from 5, or you can even use the drafting variant to select these cards, which determine what artifacts you're trying to get your hands on to cash in for points. But then every round, you're also laying out new cards, and the structure of that has changed. I don't think it's a big difference in terms of the actual gameplay. It's just the structure of it is changed to be a bit more orderly in the game itself. And those are the main changes. If I missed anything, I'll try to include it down below, but those are the main changes you're looking at as far as how the game plays differently from the first edition to the second edition. The other change is where we start talking about the expansion. The expansion in this game, it consists of 2 things. There's going to be the guilds and edifices expansion, and that introduces 2 main things, which is the guilds and the edifices. Now the guilds is a new concept, and that's going to be this guild board over here. It's something that you can see us use in our gameplay, but it basically gives you a way of trading in RP. RPs are not EP, they're your reputation points, they are the score of the game. You can trade in your RP to activate various abilities from this guild board over here, so it gives you a bunch of new things to do at the cost of your actual points in the game. The second thing is going to be the edifices, which gives you this nice little edifice book over here. In the original game, the way the edifices worked is when you dug down underneath the bottom layer, you grabbed a certain tile, and whichever tile you got was the edifice. And that edifice was something that would affect the game the next time you played. It gave you a rule that changed up the game the next time you played, making this a soft legacy game. This is not a game that you keep playing and things keep changing and evolving, but based on how one play goes, you have a rule or a situation that's in effect for your next game the next time you choose to play it. And obviously you can choose to handle that however you want, but the way it has handled was you found a tile, that particular tile determined the rule for the next game. In this game, when you hit the bottom level, instead what you're going to do is you're going to draw a card from this deck over here. So instead of having a whole, when I said that the bottom level is kind of incorporated into the board, instead of being a bunch of random tiles, you just draw a card from this deck over here, and boom, that's your ability that you're going to have for the next game. So once you hit that bottom level, you're going to have the opportunity of getting that edifice in play, and that's baked into the expansion. So removed from the base game and put into the expansion instead. And with those changes, notes, all those things, let's talk about how I feel about both those things, and they are separate things. The expansion, how I feel about those elements, and then the various quality of life improvements. And let's start with the quality of life improvements, or changes as it were, my overall opinion of them. Some, and you may have gotten this sense from me talking about it already, but some things don't particularly matter to me strongly. So for example, the cards you're going to be gathering didn't feel like a strong change, or at least since I played it last, didn't get a strong sense of a difference there, versus things like the 4 rounds play and the 1 layer less of tiles. That to me is an overall good thing. Ice is a good game, but can outstay its welcome a little bit, or at least the original edition could. I wouldn't have thought of it as too much of a long game, but I do think it's, for the game weight that it's bringing to the table, it can run a bit long. And that's a little true here too, by the way. This is not the fastest game. It's going to clock in, a fast game might take you an hour in this newer version. A little longer might take you, if you're playing at a higher play count, it might go as high as, crossing that 90-minute mark to a little higher than that. But this is a game that still takes some degree of time. It's not a short game, it's not a long game, but the original game was just a drop longer, and I think the changes in terms of reducing a full level of tiles, as well as reducing the amount of time, I think it's overall a good change. If you did watch the gameplay, or if you play this game in general, one of the things you run into as you get through the layers of ice is that the first layer is very easy to remove, but as you go further and further down, you have to get a larger and larger hole on the surface. To get this much bottom level, you have to have this much next level, and this much next level. It keeps going up, and so having that full extra layer level of tiles that's removed from the game effectively really reduces the amount of tedious work at upper level management to be able to have the same game experience but at a reduced player time, so I think that's overall a good thing. The change from 2 EP to 3 EP for the surface level, again, kind of goes into that small, slight accessibility. I don't know if I ever thought of it as a problem in the original game, but the fact that you can remove those snow tiles a drop easier does give you additional decision space as far as how you want to handle things, especially when you're trying to decide whether to return to the top level to get more things done, because for only 2 EP, you can get a new ability tile, and often less because you're often using your explorers and your architects to lower that cost, so that's a good thing over there. I'd say that bigger than that, the fact that you know which tiles have which abilities on the back of these, while I don't think that matters for you for your first game or two when you don't really have a good sense or understanding of how things will play out, I think the more you play this game, the more this kind of thing will matter for you. It really gives you that choice. And even in your first game, in your first game, it might not be something you keep in mind the whole time, but especially if you're in a tight pinch over here and you're trying to decide what to do, and you're like, wait a second, these 2 tiles over here, I can look and see what possible abilities are going to be behind them. That might drive your actions forward. Take a look at the player aid, the rulebook or whatnot, and then to get a sense of which tile possibilities are out there to be able to drive your actions forward. So I think that's just a good deterministic change to the game that gives you more room to do things, or more room to, well, to get the job done effectively. On a similar note, I think study tokens have the same quality of life change. The study tokens, to a certain extent, I find them a drop fiddly in the way that they go on your player board and count as an artifact while being a tiny tile, so that just feels a little off. But as far as the game mechanics of it, I think the game mechanics are a good thing, because again, they give you the ability to get your hands on abilities from the artifacts quicker. If you can get a turn 1 artifact, even only one of them, combine that with 1 extra EP to get 1 more study token for that artifact, and suddenly you have abilities happening. Suddenly you have the ability to go ahead and get more things done because of the cascading benefit of how your artifacts are going to help you round after round as you try to get as much reward as possible from them. So I think the study tokens are just another small thing that helps you get the job done. So I think for the most part, my opinions on the changes from first edition to second edition are either neutral or positive. I don't think anything feels like a step back. I do think that and inherently there's always the problem where you have someone who has the first edition and they want those changes. I don't think anything is game breaking here. I don't think you're missing out on a major anything. If you have a first edition copy of the game and you don't want to upgrade, I don't think it's a significant issue for you. I enjoyed the first edition. Again, you can check out my coverage of it, but I enjoyed the first edition and I still enjoy the second edition. These all feel like nice quality of life improvements, but certainly not essential ones. I enjoyed the first edition as is, and these are just slight differences and better, but not game-breaking ones. As far as the expansion is an interesting one because of the way the expansion operates, which is basically the expansion takes an aspect I liked, the edifices from the original game, and puts it into the expansion, and then it gives you those guilds as well. And for me, the guilds kind of feel okay. I don't mind the guilds, I don't mind having them there, but certainly if I'm looking at it as an expansion, the guilds on their own feel underwhelming. And the edifices, while I really like the edifices, I like the fact that you have like these 15 different rules that can affect the game and changes the way you play an entire game of Ice. Like suddenly the rules are different and the structure is different and how you're trying to operate in this game is different. I like the edifices expansion, I always did, but the thing is that it's kind of an expansion. The best part of this new expansion is something that was originally there in the base game. So on the one hand, I do recommend the Edifices and Guilds expansion, but primarily because of the Edifices, which that's where you get to the on the other hand, that was originally part of the original game. So I guess my opinion on the Edifices and Guilds expansion is I really like the Edifices. The Guilds are okay. I don't mind them. I've certainly used them and benefited from them. But I think for the most part, most of the guild abilities, I don't find myself being compelled to use on a general basis. There are some that resonate with me a bit more, that help me get the job done, and a bunch of others are like cycling tiles or cycling cards, and I'm often not trying to do things like that and giving up a point to do so. So for me personally, I find the Guilds expansion is nice, I use it, but I can't say I have like these super positive thoughts about it. It's just I would use it. I'd probably use it every time I play because I like having some of them, but I wasn't necessarily blown away by it. Versus the Edifices from the original game, I like that a lot. So as far as, I don't even know how to rate, let's rate the expansion. Let's talk about the general things. So overall, the quality of life improvements from first edition to second edition are nice to have. I like them. I think they're a good thing to have, but I don't think they're essential if you have the first edition. Versus the expansion, rating-wise in the expansion, if you're talking about it as a bundle of the guilds and edifices, then it's a 4 out of 5 on the expansion rating. The tricky part there is my most positive thoughts around that are from something that used to exist anyway. So that's why I'm having a weird time trying to, like, because my instinctive thought is I'm not overly impressed with the new expansion, but I do like the edifice. I'm going in circles at this point. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying as to why I both like the expansion and also I'm not blown away by the new content of the expansion at the same time, if that makes sense. That's basically your coverage of Ice over here. Ice, the changes from first edition to second edition, as well as the expansion and all those things. You can check out the campaign. I'll have a link to it down below. And until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful. And as always, I hope you have a good one.